It begins not in a boardroom or on a government podium, but on a dusty road in Lagos where thousands of trucks sit motionless under the weight of a broken system. Their engines idle for days, sometimes a week, forming a line so long that it disappears into the heat haze, an entire highway turned into a graveyard of steel. And while these trucks wait, mothers in Aba pay 40% more for rice fathers, in Onitsha spend twice the normal price for spare parts, and small shop owners watch their profits vanish, one frustrating day at a time. For decades, Nigerians have lived under an invisible tax, one they never voted for and can never escape. It is the price of relying on a single congested port to feed and fuel a nation of more than 200 million people. The Lagos port monopoly has shaped the economy, raised the cost of living, and trapped businesses in a cycle of delays, bribes, and losses. People feel it every time they walk into a market, every time they fill a grocery basket, every time they ask why life keeps getting more expensive. But today, something extraordinary is happening, something that could shift the weight of an entire nation. The Nigerian Port Authority has announced a move that, if completed, may finally loosen Lagos's grip on national commerce and breathe new life into the south. For the first time in generations, the possibility of balanced development no longer feels like a dream. It feels close, real, within reach. Still, a question hangs in the air like a quiet storm. Is Nigeria ready to break a century-old pattern and build a fairer economic future, or will political resistance pull the country back into the old familiar shadows? Before we go deeper, I invite you, especially those who have watched Africa rise and stumble over many decades, to reflect on this turning point. If you believe Nigerians deserve an economy that works for all, not just one region, please consider supporting this channel. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay with us as we uncover the truth behind this historic shift. In the early hours of a humid Nigerian morning, long before government officials released any statement, ordinary people had already begun to feel the tremors of a national shift. A young trader in Aba opened her shop and whispered to herself that the cost of school uniforms had risen yet again. A spare parts dealer in Onitsha stood beside a newly arrived shipment and shook his head. Transporting that single container from Lagos had cost more than the price of shipping it across the entire ocean. These quiet frustrations are not small inconveniences. They are symptoms of a system that has been stretched, strained, and broken for decades. And this is the system the Nigerian Port Authority now wants to confront. The central event is simple to describe, yet monumental in its implications. The Nigerian Port Authority has announced its intention to move major port operations away from Lagos, specifically from the Apapa and Tinkan Island corridors, and shift them to Warri in the southern region. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a direct intervention aimed at breaking the near-total dominance of Lagos over Nigeria's maritime trade. For almost 100 years, Lagos has served as the country's economic gatekeeper, handling between 70 and 80% of all cargo entering Nigeria. In a country of over 200 million people, spread across 36 states, that level of concentration is almost unheard of anywhere else in the world. To understand the gravity of the announcement, you must first understand the weight Lagos has been carrying and imposing. The Lagos ports were built in 1926 during the colonial era, designed for a population and an industrial capacity that no longer resemble modern Nigeria. Their infrastructure has not kept pace with the country's explosive growth. Despite handling more than 1.5 million 20-foot equivalent units, TEUs, per year, the ports possess fewer than 10 functional gantry cranes, far below the minimum requirements of a modern terminal. With outdated equipment, limited space, and inadequate digital systems, the entire structure has become what many experts call Africa's most expensive bottleneck. Delays at the Lagos ports are legendary. A container can spend more than 21 days from arrival to clearance, a staggering contrast to global averages of 3 to 5 days. In Singapore, the same process takes only 6 hours. Between day 1 and day 3, ships wait offshore for a berth. Days 4 through 7 are spent offloading. After that, containers sit motionless, while 32 different government agencies, all demanding documentation permissions and in some cases unofficial payments, touch the same cargo. These agencies include the Nigerian Customs Service, the Standards Organization, the Port Health Service, NAVDAC, NASRIA, and many more. By the end of the 21-day cycle, importers face demurrage fees, storage fees, truck delays, and endless facilitation costs. But the delays inside the port are only half the story. Outside Lagos has become a maze of paralysis. The roads leading to Apapa resemble a permanent traffic jam with more than 15,000 trucks attempting to access a road network designed for only 1,500. The result is a logistical nightmare, trucks waiting 3 to 7 days just to enter the port, bridges deteriorating under constant overload, and businesses relocating entirely because the congestion has destroyed their ability to operate efficiently. Against this backdrop, the Nigerian Port Authority's decision begins to look less like a bold experiment and more like an overdue rescue mission. The announcement is rooted in undeniable economic data. Nigeria loses an estimated 7.66 trillion naira every year due to Lagos-related congestion. Businesses lose an additional 20 billion naira daily because of inefficiencies unique to the Lagos port corridor. And yet, despite these astronomical losses, other ports across the country remain inactive or underutilized. Warri, Calabar, Onitsha, and Rivers each possess the physical potential to relieve the pressure, yet they have been relegated to secondary status for decades. This is the environment in which the Nigerian Port Authority has chosen to act, a landscape defined by inefficiency, inequality, and an almost complete dependence on a single, overburdened entry point. The move to Warri is not just a logistical decision, it is a national recalibration, an attempt to correct a century of economic imbalance. The tension reached its peak not in a government office, but in the markets and streets where the consequences of Lagos's dominance played out daily. In Aba, a textile merchant carefully unfolded a roll of fabric while explaining to a customer why the price had risen again. "It is not the cloth," she whispered. "It is the port." Her frustration was echoed hundreds of miles away in Onitsha, where a young man unloading a shipment confessed that the trucking fee from Lagos had nearly doubled, costing more than the entire ocean freight from China. These moments, quiet, personal, and deeply human, became the fuel that pushed the national conversation toward a breaking point. The economic climax unfolded when analysts began comparing the true cost of importing through Lagos versus Warri. The numbers revealed what years of complaints had tried to articulate. Importing a 40-foot container through Lagos could cost an importer anywhere between $8,000 and $14,900 once demurrage fees, trucking delays, and multiple checkpoints were accounted for. Yet, the same container cleared through Warri would cost between $4,700 and $7,400, a saving so large that many business owners initially refused to believe it. For importers who processed 50 to 100 containers a year, this translated into annual savings of $167,500 to $750,000. For a nation full of manufacturers, traders, and workshop owners, it was nothing short of an economic awakening. The real spark came when people realized that 65% of all goods cleared in Lagos ended up in the southeast and south-south regions that had been denied fully functional deep-sea ports for decades. This meant the very communities carrying the economic burden were the least served by the system. The injustice was too obvious to ignore. Businesses began openly questioning why their goods needed to travel hundreds of miles from Lagos when ports in Warri, Calabar, Onitsha, and Rivers were sitting underused. They asked why dredging hadn't been completed, why access roads had crumbled, and why a handful of agencies in Lagos effectively controlled the nation's entire import lifeline. And then came the political storm. The Lagos state government publicly opposed the Nigerian Port Authority's decision, framing it as a direct attack on Lagos's economy. They argued that Lagos generated 60% of NPA revenue and that shifting operations elsewhere would hurt national income. But the NP countered swiftly, reminding the nation that Nigeria had 36 states, not one, and that no country in the world concentrated nearly all its maritime commerce in a single city. The goal was not to punish Lagos, they said. The goal was to save Nigeria. This clash ignited debates across all regions. Supporters of decentralization saw the move as an overdue correction, an opportunity to relieve Lagos's collapsing infrastructure while empowering long-neglected southern states. Importers supported the transition because it directly impacted their survival. Traders, market women, and small business owners felt hopeful for the first time in years, imagining a future where goods arrived faster, cheaper, and without the exhausting gauntlet of delays. Yet resistance remained intense. Some political actors warned that shifting port activity away from Lagos could destabilize the city's economy, reduce its influence, and weaken federal revenues. Others accused NPA of acting hastily without sufficient consultation. But underneath all the noise, the people recognized a deeper truth: what Lagos lost in monopoly, Nigeria could gain in stability. By the time the public fully grasped the implications of the Port Authority's plan, the debate had transformed into something larger than transportation logistics. It became a question of identity. Was Nigeria willing to remain tied to a structure built in 1926, or could it break away from a century-old economic tradition to embrace a more balanced national future? It was in this moment, charged with conflict, hope, and fear, that the nation realized the stakes were far greater than a port relocation. This was a battle over fairness, unity, and the economic soul of the country. Long before policymakers began drafting responses, the Nigerian public had already started imagining what life might look like if the burden of Lagos's congestion finally began to lift. In Aba, a mother pictured buying school uniforms without calculating whether the price had risen again. In Onitsha, a shop owner wondered what it would feel like to receive goods in days rather than weeks. These small images, simple moments of relief, are the heart of the civil consequences tied to the Port Authority's proposal. At the most basic level, shifting port operations to Warri promises a dramatic reduction in the cost of living. When goods move faster, when trucking delays disappear, and when demurrage fees no longer eat into business profits, the savings ripple outward through every Nigerian marketplace. A bag of rice, a children's backpack, a basic phone charger all become more affordable. For a country where millions survive on thin margins, this isn't just an economic improvement, it is a social lifeline. Lower import costs would mean better access to essential products, greater stability for small traders, and a tangible reduction in the daily stress that has shaped Nigerian life for decades. Beyond price relief, the move stands to bring massive job creation to the south. Operating a major port requires thousands of workers, dockhands, crane operators, freight agents, truck drivers, maintenance crews, cleaners, security personnel, and service providers. Hotels, restaurants, warehouses, transport companies, and small businesses would grow naturally around a fully functional Warri port. The South, long overshadowed by Lagos's economic gravity, would begin to experience the multiplier effect that only infrastructure investment can unlock. For many Nigerians, the shift represents the first real chance at balanced development in a generation. But the consequences extend far deeper into the political and emotional fabric of the nation. Concentrating nearly all maritime commerce in Lagos has over time created a sense of exclusion among regions that feel economically sidelined, particularly the Southeast and South-South. These regions contribute immensely to the country's entrepreneurial strength, yet for years they have watched their local ports fall into disuse, while Lagos struggled under the weight of national demand. The result has been a quiet, simmering frustration, one that often manifests as political distrust, regional resentment, and in some cases separatist sentiments. Redistributing port operations begins to address these tensions at their root. It signals that the federal government is finally willing to invest in regions beyond Lagos, giving them not just symbolic recognition, but genuine economic power. This could strengthen national unity by reducing the perception that one region benefits at the expense of others. For older Nigerians who have witnessed civil unrest, military rule, and political upheaval, the possibility of a more equitable economy carries enormous emotional weight. It suggests a path toward healing stability and shared prosperity. At the political level, the shift challenges existing power structures. Lagos, accustomed to being the country's uncontested economic hub, stands to lose a portion of its influence. Yet this redistribution does not weaken Nigeria, it strengthens it. Nations with multiple thriving ports are more resilient, more competitive, and less vulnerable to regional bottlenecks. In a globalized world, depending on one entry point is not just inefficient, it is strategically dangerous. By empowering Warri and other southern ports, Nigeria positions itself as a more adaptable and secure economic player in West Africa and beyond. Ultimately, the civil and political consequences converge on a single truth: Nigeria's future cannot depend on a single city. To build a nation that works for all its people, opportunities must be spread, burdens must be shared, and the promise of development must reach every corner of the country. The proposed shift is more than a policy change. It is a chance to rewrite the relationship between Nigeria's people, its regions, and its economy. Long before Nigerian policymakers realized the magnitude of what was unfolding, global observers, especially in Washington, Brussels, and Beijing, had already begun recalculating their projections. To the outside world, Nigeria is not just another developing nation. It is Africa's most populous country, its largest economy, and a critical hinge in West Africa's security and trade architecture. When a country of that scale attempts to rebalance its entire maritime system, the international community pays attention. From an American perspective, the shift away from a Lagos-centric port structure holds deep strategic importance. For decades, U.S. companies operating in Nigeria have faced the same logistical challenges as local businesses: unpredictable clearance times, inflated trucking costs, damaged goods from long delays, and volatile price swings driven by port congestion. These inefficiencies have discouraged investment and hindered the ability of American firms in retail agriculture, energy, and manufacturing to expand within the Nigerian market. A more reliable, diversified port system centered around Warri and potentially other southern cities could remove one of the largest barriers to U.S.-Nigeria economic cooperation. But Washington's interest goes beyond commerce. American policymakers understand that economic frustration often evolves into political instability. A nation that relies on a single overburdened port is vulnerable not only to corruption or poor infrastructure, but to sabotage, unrest, and natural disasters. For U.S. security planners who monitor West Africa's stability, Nigeria's diversification of its port system is not just good economics. It is a move that strengthens regional security and reduces the risk of supply chain interruptions that could affect the entire Gulf of Guinea. Europe, particularly France and the EU bloc, views the shift through a different lens. European companies have long relied on Lagos's established, though chaotic, systems. A stronger Warri threatens to redistribute influence within the region and reduce Europe's traditional advantage in maritime logistics across West Africa. Meanwhile, China, already heavily invested in ports across the continent, sees opportunity. A revitalized Warri would open the door for deeper Chinese involvement in port modernization, rail links, and industrial zones if Nigeria welcomes such partnerships. For the global maritime community, the story is even broader. Nigeria, ranking 402 out of 403 ports globally, has been a source of embarrassment not just for Nigeria itself, but for international companies forced to navigate its inefficiencies. A successful transformation would signal that West Africa is entering a new economic phase, one defined by modernization rather than stagnation. And for older Americans watching this from afar, there is a familiar echo. The United States once depended heavily on the Port of New York until congestion, rising costs, and population shifts forced the nation to decentralize expanding activity to Los Angeles, Houston, Savannah, and Baltimore. That transformation unlocked massive national growth. Nigeria today stands at a similar crossroad. This recalibration also fits within a larger continental wave. Across Africa, leaders are challenging old economic structures and pushing for sovereignty-driven development. Africa News has been highlighting these shifts, particularly the assertive reforms in the Sahel. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore has emphasized decentralization, resource control, and regionally balanced development principles mirrored in Nigeria's attempt to break the Lagos monopoly. Nations across West Africa are beginning to rethink how infrastructure, trade, and sovereignty intertwine. To the world, Nigeria's shift is more than a port story. It is a signal that Africa's largest economy may finally be aligning itself with the broader movement sweeping the continent, one that prioritizes fairness, regional balance, and long-term strategic stability. As Nigeria stands at this crossroads, there is both hope and a quiet warning in the air. Hope, because for the first time in decades, the country is confronting an imbalance that has silently drained its resources, inflated the cost of living, and caused deep regional frustration. But the warning is just as real if the country retreats from this moment. If political pressure forces a return to the old Lagos monopoly, Nigeria may continue losing trillions of naira each year and risk deepening the sense of economic exclusion among millions of its citizens. A nation cannot build unity on a foundation where one region thrives while others feel forgotten. The choice before Nigeria is not simply about ports or shipping lanes. It is about whether the country is ready to redesign its internal map of opportunity. A functioning Warri port could spark growth across the south, encourage industries to settle where they were once ignored, and spread economic oxygen into regions long starved of investment. But if this effort collapses under resistance or sabotage, the consequences may go far beyond higher prices. They could feed political tensions that have lingered in Nigeria for generations. For older Americans watching this story unfold, the echoes of history are unmistakable. The United States transformed its own destiny when it broke free from single-port dependency, allowing new hubs to rise and creating balanced prosperity across the nation. That shift was not easy. It demanded courage, persistence, and a willingness to imagine a different future. Nigeria faces the same test today. Across Africa, leaders are beginning to embrace similar choices. Africa News has been chronicling how countries like Burkina Faso, under President Ibrahim Traore, are pursuing decentralization and economic sovereignty, rejecting old structures that concentrate power and wealth in narrow corridors. Whether in ports, minerals, agriculture, or manufacturing, African nations are asking the same question: should prosperity belong to one region or to all of us? Nigeria must answer that question now. And so must its people. Will the nation seize this opportunity to build a fairer economic landscape, or will it fall back into the familiar patterns that have held it down for nearly a century? Are Nigerians ready to support a redistribution of power that could lift millions out of hardship? Can a country divided by geography finally unite through shared prosperity? I invite you to reflect deeply on these questions. They will shape not only Nigeria's future, but the future of West Africa as a whole. And if you believe that truth matters more than headlines, if you believe Nigeria deserves balanced development and economic fairness, please share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want to be among the first to understand and support Africa's new direction. And share this video if you believe the people deserve to know what is really happening. The story is still unfolding, and your voice, your perspective, your support truly matter.